students, today's agenda is to check homework. We'll be learning embedded functions and you will be able to do 8.2. Today students will be able to simplify embedded functions, and many of the times we'll end up or we'll be working with rational expressions. But before going into our lesson, I would like to invite you to join me on TikTok for fun encounters of math and nature, bacteria, holidays, and much more. You can find me as Math Maria or at Math Maria 7. And now back to our lesson. This is an embedded function. Embedded means within or inside. One function is inside of another. And in the next lesson, we'll learn how they are connected and how it relates to real life. But in here, we're just going to do the procedure. First thing that you need to do is look at the letter outside. That refers to the function that we're going to be using first. But when we write that function, for example, here it's f, we're going to use f of x. That means that we're going to use this expression. And in here we have a rational expression. Rational means that it's in form of a fraction. For the first one, whenever we see an x, we get rid of the x and we put a parenthesis in its place. So the first step is to put the 1. We're going to put the line for the fraction, and we will put 3 times a parenthesis. 3 times a parenthesis plus 2. Notice how we didn't get rid of anything other than the x. What did we do with the x? It became a parenthesis. Why? Because that's where we're going to embed the other function. That's where we're going to insert. So the next function is h of x. We go to h of x is 1 minus x. And so in that parenthesis, we will put 1 minus x. Now we have one function within the other function. 1 over 3x plus 2. But the x became that function inside. Okay, and now we continue. We do distributive property. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times negative x is negative 3x. And we bring down the 2. We combine like terms. In this case, it's 3 and 2. And so we usually write the variable term. So negative 3x. Positive 3 and positive 2 is positive 5. So notice how I'm just simplifying down everything that is in the denominator. But then we need to rewrite it. We bring over the 1 and we have negative 3x plus 5. From there we cannot do anything else, so that's going to be our simplified answer. For number 2, we have h of f of x. Something that I want to let you know that sometimes you will see another notation, which is h of f of x. And this refers to exactly the same thing. This and this is exactly an embedded function. And if you get confused, just make sure that you put another set of parentheses in here to replace that little circle. Okay? Okay, so the first variable or letter tells me which function I'm going to use. Remembering that for the first one, I will put a parenthesis instead of an x. Make sure that you get rid of the x, because that's one of the things that I notice. Students will put the parenthesis but will not remove the x. They will put the parenthesis next to it. No, you substitute. Get rid of the x and that becomes a parenthesis. So 1 minus, don't forget to keep the minus. The minus is not part of the x. So 1 minus, put the parenthesis instead, and you're going to insert f of x in there. So f of x is 1 over 3x plus 1. So 1 over 3x plus 2, not plus 1. In here, we want to end with one rational expression, not 2 terms. And so, first of all, we need to find a common denominator. If you remember, whenever we have a 1 and we wanted to make it into fourths, let's say, if you had something like 1 minus 2 thirds, let's say, what we tended to do is put this over 1, and we would multiply by that denominator, both the numerator and denominator of this one. And we would get 1 times 3, 3, 1 times 3, 3, minus 2/3, so that we would get the common denominator. After that, since we have the common denominator, all we did was to subtract the numerator. So 3 minus 2 is 1, and we just kept the denominator. Okay, so that's something that we're going to do in here, but with an expression. Instead of multiplying by this, we're going to multiply by this one right here. So this one becomes 1 over 1 minus 1 over 3x plus 2. And so we're going to use this denominator. We're going to use this denominator to multiply times both the numerator and denominator. So times 3x plus 2. Same in the denominator. And what we get is 1 times 3x plus 2 is 3x plus 2 over 3x plus 2, because 1 times any number is that number, or in this case expression. And we're going to subtract 1 over 3x plus 2. Now that we have the common denominator, we just rewrite it as 3x plus 2. And in here, since we're subtracting, we're just going to subtract the constant with the constant. So 2 minus 1 is 1. So we end up with 3x plus 1. And so that's going to be our answer. Now for number 3, there is a value instead of an x. That means that we're going to end up with a rational number or an integer. That also means that you will have to have 2 parentheses to replace a parenthesis instead of the x in here, and a parenthesis instead of the x for the second function, or the one that goes inside. And instead of that x, we're going to put a value in the smallest parenthesis. Let's see. So for f of x, we have 1 over 3 parentheses, 1 over 3 parentheses plus 2. Okay, 3 parentheses plus 2. Then we go to the next function, the one that goes inside, which is the function of h of x. And inside of the parentheses, we're going to put this expression, but instead of the x, it's a smaller parentheses. Okay, and usually we deal with brackets in here so that we don't have a parenthesis inside of another parenthesis. But for embedded functions, I usually just say use them even though it's not appropriately used. That's okay, and I'll let you know how it would be appropriate in a minute. But okay, so 1 minus parentheses. Okay, so inside of these parentheses, you put the one that goes inside, but instead of an x, you put another parenthesis. So 1 minus a smaller parenthesis. And in that parenthesis, you're going to include the value that we have right there. And from there on, all you have to do basically is just simplify following PEMDAS, or the order of operations. So what would be appropriately used in here? For the first one, you would have to use brackets instead of the parentheses for the one outside. And then plus 2. And then inside, then you would put 1 minus the parentheses. That will be the appropriate way. You can use whichever if you feel comfortable. That's fine. We'll get down to one simplified answer anyways. So now we are going to work with this first. So 1 minus 3 is -2. Bring down the parentheses. We already finished this one. Bring down the 3. Don't get confused. This continues to be multiplication. And bring down the 2, the plus 2 as well. First, we do multiplication. 3 times -2 is -6. And bring down the 2. And then when we have a negative and a positive, we subtract and leave the greater sign. So 6 minus 2 is 4, but the greater sign is negative. And so the answer is going to be 1 over negative 4. Okay, so my answer here will be 1 over negative 4, but the negative belongs to the entire fraction, so you might as well just put it next to that line. If you put it down here or up there with the 1, it doesn't really make a difference, but more appropriately, it would be right in the middle. For number 4, we have f of g of 3. Again, we will start with the function of f, which is 1 over 3x, but instead of x, we put a parenthesis plus 2. Inside of this parenthesis, we will put the function of g. But again, because it has a number, only when it has a number, we put a second parenthesis. Okay, so it's going to be g of x is 5 over parenthesis minus 10. And in that little parenthesis, we put that value. So it's 3 right there. Now we simplify. So do distributive property here. And we get 3 times 5, 15. 15 divided by 3 is 5. 3 times negative 10, negative 30. And this is outside of the parentheses, so you just bring it down. Now when we have 5 minus 30, that's negative 25. Remember that when the signs are different, you subtract and leave the greater sign, so negative 25. And then you owe 25, but you paid $2. That's negative 23. So the answer for this embedded function is going to be 1 from here over the negative. We can put it in the middle and the 23 down here. So negative 1 over 23. If you can please support our channel by giving us a thumbs up, subscribing around here. This is the link to the next video, and here you will find the entire unit. Now you're able to do 8.2 and have fun.